Solitary candles, Olivia Parker never wanted grand celebrations. After years of disappointments, forgotten birthdays, half-hearted gatherings, and promises broken like delicate glass, she had come to appreciate the quiet dignity of solitude. Her 34th birthday would be no different. Just her, a slice of strawberry cream cake, and the warm ambiance of Bellflower Cafe, a tiny establishment tucked between a bookshop and a flower store on Maple Avenue. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and coffee, with soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. Rain tapped gently against the windows, creating a cozy barrier between her and the rest of the world. Olivia adjusted her copper-framed glasses and smoothed down her navy blouse. Oddly, nervous despite being alone. The waitress, Josie, according to her name tag, approached with a gentle smile and placed the cake before her. "On the house," Josie whispered with a conspiratorial wink. "A little bird told me it was your birthday." Olivia blushed. She'd mentioned it offhandedly last week while ordering her usual Earl Grey tea. The fact that Josie remembered made something warm bloom in her chest. Small kindnesses still existed in the world. "Thank you," she murmured, genuinely touched. A single candle flickered atop the cake, its flame dancing in rhythm with the rain outside. Olivia closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. What does one wish for when one has learned to expect nothing? Perhaps simply for more evenings like this. Peaceful, uncomplicated, without the sting of disappointment that came with hoping for too much. She opened her eyes, ready to extinguish the small flame, when a voice broke through her solitude. "Don't. Forget to make a wish first." Startled, Olivia turned toward the source. At the table beside hers sat a man with kind hazel eyes and salt and pepper hair at his temples, despite appearing to be in his late 30s. He wore a charcoal sweater with elbow patches that gave him a scholarly air, and his smile held something that made her heart stutter. Recognition. "I'm sorry," she said, flustered by the interruption. "Do I know you?" The man's smile deepened, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "Not formally, no, but I know you, Olivia. Happy birthday." A chill ran down her spine. "How do you know my name? Or that it's my birthday?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowered as if sharing a secret. 7 years ago, you gave up your seat on the 8:15 train to Brighton for someone who looked like they needed it more than you. That someone was me." Olivia frowned, searching her memory. There had been many train rides, many faces, many moments long forgotten in the blur of daily existence. "I'm Thomas," he continued, seeing her confusion. "Thomas Halloway. And I've waited a very long time to thank you properly." "I don't remember," she admitted, studying his face for any hint of familiarity. "You wouldn't," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "It was just an ordinary Tuesday for you, but for me, it was the day everything changed." Olivia's fingers hovered over the candle flame, its warmth barely touching her skin. The cafe seemed to fade around them, the jazz melting into the background, the rain becoming a distant lullaby. "May I join you?" Thomas asked, his voice gentle, giving her every opportunity to decline. Against her better judgment, against years of careful distance she had cultivated, Olivia nodded. As Thomas moved to her table, bringing with him a cup of black coffee and an air of quiet anticipation, she finally blew out the candle. What she didn't tell him was that she had wished for something unexpected. The train connection. Thomas settled into the chair across from Olivia, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The cafe's warm lighting softened the edges of his face, highlighting a thin scar above his right eyebrow. Rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, creating an intimate bubble around their table. 7 years is a long time to remember a stranger, Olivia said, cutting into her cake with the edge of her fork. She didn't eat it, just pushed it gently around the plate, a nervous habit from childhood. Thomas cupped his coffee mug between his hands. It wasn't just any day for me. That morning I had lost everything. His voice remained steady, but Olivia caught the subtle shift in his posture, shoulders tensing slightly as he revisited the memory. I was heading to Brighton to see my father, who was in hospice care. I'd just been laid off from the architecture firm where I'd worked for 8 years. My fiancée had called off our engagement the night before, saying she couldn't handle my emotional unavailability. I was carrying everything I owned in a single duffel bag. Olivia put her fork down, the cake forgotten. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Thomas said with a small smile. "That's not why I'm telling you this. The train that morning was packed, standing room only. I remember feeling dizzy, overwhelmed. Everything was collapsing, and I couldn't even find a place to sit down and breathe." He took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "Then you stood up. You were wearing a green scarf with little yellow flowers. You had a book, Murakami, I think, and you marked your page carefully before standing. You said, 'You look like you need this more than I do,' and walked away before I could even thank you." Olivia's brow furrowed as fragments of memory stirred. The green scarf had been a gift from her grandmother. The Murakami novel was Kafka on the Shore. She had indeed given up her seat to someone on a crowded train once, maybe several times, but the specifics had long dissolved into the mundane tapestry of daily commutes. "That small act of kindness," Thomas continued, "was the first good thing that had happened to me in weeks. I sat down and found a business card that had fallen between the seats. It was for Westbrook and Associates, a small architectural firm in Brighton. On a whim, after seeing my father, I went to their office." Olivia leaned forward, drawn into his story despite her initial skepticism. "They hired me that same week. The position allowed me to stay in Brighton, close to my father during his final months. Later, I became a partner in the firm." His eyes met hers, earnest and clear. "One seat on one train, Olivia. You set in motion a chain of events that changed everything." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the cafe windows with renewed vigor. Josie moved quietly among the few occupied tables, refilling coffee cups and lighting candles as the evening deepened. "That's quite a butterfly effect," Olivia said softly. "But how did you find me? How did you know I'd be here tonight?" Thomas rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking sheepish. "That's where the story gets a bit complicated. After my father passed, I found myself thinking about that moment on the train more and more. It represented something important, how small kindnesses can alter someone's path. I wanted to thank the woman with the green scarf." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn train ticket, preserved carefully in a small plastic sleeve. "I had your reflection in the window of the train that day, captured in a photo I took of the countryside, just a partial profile. For years it was just a nice memory, nothing more." Olivia felt a strange flutter in her stomach, part unease, part curiosity. "3 months ago, I was in town for a project consultation. I stopped here for coffee and saw you at this same table reading. The profile matched. I asked Josie about you, and she mentioned you were a regular, that you came here every Wednesday evening and on your birthday." A flash of recognition crossed Olivia's face. "You've been here before, last month reading the architecture magazine, and before that discussing blueprints with someone." Thomas nodded, a touch of color rising to his cheeks. "I came back several times, working up the courage to approach you. I didn't want to seem intrusive. And yet here we are," Olivia said, not unkindly, "with you knowing much more about me than I know about you." "Fair point." Thomas laughed softly. "But I'd very much like to change that balance if you'll let me." As the cafe lights dimmed slightly, signaling the approach of closing time, Olivia found herself at a crossroads. The sensible part of her, the part that had built careful walls after years of disappointment, whispered caution. But another part, long dormant, stirred with curiosity. "Tell me something else," she said, surprising herself. Something I don't know about you yet. Thomas's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. I collect vintage typewriters. I can't whistle. To save my life. And your act of kindness made me promise myself I'd pass it forward every day since. The last of Olivia's birthday candle flickered and died, sending a thin trail of smoke upward. But something else, something new, had begun to kindle. Hidden patterns. The clock on the cafe wall chimed 9, and Josie appeared beside their table with gentle reluctance. We're closing in 30 minutes, she said, refilling their cups before retreating to the counter. Olivia wrapped her hands around her fresh tea, the warmth spreading through her fingers. The rain had eased to a soft patter, and the streetlights outside cast golden halos on the wet pavement. Would you like to continue our conversation somewhere else? Thomas asked, his invitation hanging in the air between them. There's a small park across the street with a covered gazebo. Or I understand completely if you'd rather call it a night. Olivia surprised herself again. The park sounds nice. They gathered their things, her worn leather satchel, his charcoal pea coat, and stepped into the damp evening air. The park was deserted, droplets clinging to benches and playground equipment like suspended stars. The gazebo stood in the center, its white wooden structure illuminated by string lights wound around the railings. As they settled onto the dry bench inside, Olivia noticed a plaque on the central post. Hartwell Community Gazebo Restored 2022. Wait, she said, running her fingers over the engraved metal. Westbrook and Associates. Isn't that your firm? Thomas nodded, surprise evident in his expression. We did the restoration pro bono. How did you know? I work for the city planning department, Olivia explained. I approved the permits for this project. She shook her head in disbelief. I remember being impressed by the detailed preservation plan. That was my design, Thomas said quietly. Another connection we never knew about. The coincidence hung between them, too precise to dismiss as mere chance. Olivia felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool night air. There's more, isn't there? She asked, suddenly certain. Thomas hesitated, then reached for his phone. May I show you something? He scrolled through his photos and handed her the device. On the screen was a photograph of a large mural spanning the side of a building, vibrant blues and greens depicting an underwater scene with sea turtles and coral reefs. The Brunswick Street Children's Hospital, Olivia said immediately. I organized the community art project last year. My nephew was a patient there, Thomas explained. He had leukemia. During his treatment, he would stare at that mural for hours. Said it made him feel like he could swim away from all the needles and medicine. His voice softened. He's in remission now. Olivia remembered the project vividly. How she'd fought for funding, coordinated local artists, spent weekends with volunteers painting the massive scene. I never got to meet any of the children. The hospital just sent me thank you cards. The blue turtle in the corner was his favorite, Thomas said. He has a sketch of it on his bedroom wall. Olivia watched a droplet travel down a string light, gathering luminescence before falling. I'd say that sometimes we don't see what's right in front of us until we're ready to see it. The park's lamps flickered briefly as a gust of wind swept through the trees, shaking loose a shower of raindrops. In that momentary darkness, Olivia felt a shift, as if the universe had momentarily held its breath. It's getting late, she said, though she made no move to leave. It is, Thomas agreed, equally still. The gazebo lights steadied again, illuminating the space between them. A space that seemed to hold all the years they hadn't known each other, all the near misses and parallel paths, all condensed into this single point in time. Tell me something, else I don't know about you, Olivia said, echoing her earlier request. Thomas looked directly into her eyes. I believe that nothing important in life happens by accident. Midnight. Confession. The midnight hour approached. marked by the distant chiming of the town hall clock. 11 melodic tones carried through the mist, reminding Olivia that her birthday was nearly over. The park had become an island in the fog, streetlights reduced to hazy glows beyond the gazebo's shelter. "We should probably head back soon," Olivia said, though her words lacked conviction. She had work tomorrow, reports to file, meetings to attend, yet the thought of ending this strange, enchanted evening felt premature. "A few more minutes?" Thomas asked, his voice carrying a note of urgency she hadn't heard before. "There's something else I need to tell you." The gravity in his tone made her pause. "Is everything all right?" Thomas shifted on the bench, turning to face her more directly. In the string light's glow, his expression was both vulnerable and determined, a man preparing to leap across some internal chasm. "Remember when I said I'd seen you several times before approaching you tonight?" He waited for her nod before continuing. That wasn't the complete truth. Olivia felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the prelude to disappointment she knew too well. "Go on." "After my father's funeral, I went through a period of reflection. I kept thinking about that moment on the train, how a small kindness from a stranger had created this ripple effect in my life." His hands fidgeted slightly, smoothing invisible wrinkles from his pants. "I decided to find you, not to intrude on your life, just to thank you properly." "How?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The photo I took that day on the train. It captured more than just your reflection. You were reading a university alumni magazine. I could make out the masthead." He paused, seeming to gauge her reaction. "I contacted the alumni office, described. You mentioned you might have graduated around 2013 based on your age." Olivia tensed. "That's thorough." "They couldn't give me your information, of course," Thomas hurried to explain, "but they did confirm someone matching your description had been featured in their community service spotlight that year. They mentioned you worked for the city planning department." "So you found me through my workplace?" "No," Thomas shook his head. "I decided that was crossing a line. Instead, I donated to the Alumni Scholarship Fund in honor of the woman with the green scarf. I thought that would be my closure, paying your kindness forward." The tension in Olivia's shoulders eased slightly, but confusion remained. "Then, how did we end up here?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it slightly. 2 years ago, my firm bid on the Hartwell Riverfront Revitalization Project. I saw your name on the approval committee. It felt like, I don't know, the universe offering an opportunity. "But you didn't approach me then either," Olivia noted. "No. I withdrew from the project team, asked a colleague to handle it instead." His gaze dropped to his hands. "I was engaged again by then, to Renee. I thought perhaps the connections were just coincidences after all." Olivia processed this new information, uncertain how to feel about this extended history she'd been unaware of. "And now? What changed?" "Everything." Thomas's voice cracked slightly. "Renee and I ended things 6 months ago. She said I was waiting for something I couldn't articulate, and she was right." The confession hung in the damp air between them. Olivia felt her carefully constructed boundaries wavering. This was precisely why she preferred solitude. Messy emotions, complicated histories, the risk of misplaced trust. "When I saw you at Bellflower Cafe 3 months ago," Thomas continued, "it felt like the culmination of something important, like all these years of near misses were leading to that moment. But I couldn't just walk up and say, 'Hi, I'm the guy whose life you changed with a seat on a train, and by the way, I've been peripherally aware of you for years.'" Despite herself, Olivia laughed, a genuine, surprised sound that cut through the tension. "No, that probably wouldn't have gone well." Thomas smiled, relief evident in his expression. "So I kept coming back." "Not stalking you," he hastened to clarify. "Just hoping for the right moment. Tonight, when I saw you alone on your birthday, it finally felt right." Olivia was quiet for a long moment, sorting through her feelings. "I should be disturbed by this." "You have every right to be." "But I'm not. Not entirely." She wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. "I've spent years building walls, Thomas. After my fiancé left—" She stopped, surprised to find herself offering this piece of her history. "You were engaged too?" Thomas asked gently. 5 years ago. He decided 3 weeks before the wedding that he wasn't emotionally equipped for commitment. The old pain had dulled to a distant ache, but stating it aloud still felt like pressing on a bruise. After that, I chose simplicity, predictability, no grand gestures, no complicated entanglements, just peace. Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. And here I am, disrupting that peace with an impossible story. Yes. Olivia smiled, faintly. Here you are. The 12th chime of the clock echoed across the park. Olivia's birthday was officially over, dissolving into the past like all the ones before it. But unlike those others, this one had carved a distinct mark in her memory. "What now?" Thomas asked, the question encompassing far more than just their immediate plans. Olivia found herself at another crossroads, the familiar path of caution, stretching in one direction, an unknown route in the other. The woman she had been yesterday would have chosen the former without hesitation. "I have a confession too," she said finally. "When I blew out my candle tonight, I wished for something to change. For years I've been telling myself that contentment is enough, that peace is preferable to risk." Her voice steadied as she continued. "But somewhere along the way, peace became isolation." Thomas remained silent, giving her space to find her words. "I don't know what this is," Olivia gestured between them, "or what it could become. But I think I'd like to find out." The fog swirled around the gazebo, transforming the ordinary park into something from a dream. In that mist-shrouded moment, with the birthday candle long extinguished and midnight past, Olivia felt something shift within her, a lock turning, a door opening to possibilities she had long ago resigned herself to living without. "So would I," Thomas said simply, his words carrying the weight of years of waiting, of patterns forming in the dark, of paths converging when least expected. He reached across the space between them, his hand open, offering rather than taking. After a moment's hesitation, Olivia placed her hand in his. New Beginnings' dawn crept over Hartwell like a watercolor painting, first in delicate pinks, then bold strokes of orange and gold. Olivia and Thomas had watched the night transform from their perch in the gazebo, talking through hours that seemed both endless and fleeting. They had shared stories of childhood dreams, professional disappointments, small triumphs, and quiet joys, filling in the vast blank spaces of their unknowing connection. "I can't believe we've been here all night," Olivia said, stifling a yawn. Her practical self had made several appearances, suggesting they should call it a night, but each time, another question, another revelation had kept her firmly rooted. To the gazebo bench. Thomas checked his watch, surprise crossing his features. 6:15. I haven't pulled an all-nighter since architecture school. The morning dew sparkled on the grass surrounding their shelter, and early birds had begun their tentative chorus. The world was waking up around them, reminding Olivia that reality, with all its responsibilities and routines, awaited. "I should go home and change before work," she said reluctantly, gathering her satchel. "I can't exactly show up in yesterday's clothes." "Call in sick," Thomas suggested with a playful glint in his eyes. "It's not every day you turn 34. "That was yesterday," she reminded him with a smile. "Today I'm just an ordinary woman who stayed out all night talking to a stranger." "Not quite strangers anymore, are we?" Thomas stood, offering his hand to help her up. Olivia accepted it, feeling a pleasant warmth as their fingers connected. No, not strangers. But what are we then? The question hung between them as they stepped out of the gazebo and into the fresh morning air. The park looked different in daylight, smaller, more defined, less magical. Yet Olivia found herself reluctant to leave its boundaries, as if crossing back into the real world might break whatever spell had been cast during the night. "Let me walk you home," Thomas said, falling into step beside her as they followed the winding path toward the park exit. As they walked, Olivia found herself hyper-aware of the city awakening: newspaper deliveries, early commuters, shopkeepers, raising their shutters. The ordinary rhythm of life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened, when her entire world felt subtly but irrevocably shifted. "This is me," she said as they reached a tidy brownstone on Chestnut Street. 3 shallow steps led to a blue door with a brass knocker shaped like an owl, a whimsical touch that had endeared the apartment to her immediately when she'd moved in 4 years ago. Thomas nodded, taking in the details of her home. "It suits you. Would you like to come in for coffee?" The invitation slipped out before she could analyze it, surprising them both. "I'd like that very much," he replied, his expression warm. Inside, Olivia's apartment reflected her carefully cultivated life. Bookshelves organized by genre and author, a modest collection of framed botanical prints, a small writing desk positioned by the window overlooking a courtyard garden. Everything in its place, nothing excessive or untidy. As she moved to the kitchen to prepare coffee, Thomas gravitated toward her bookshelves, examining the titles with interest. "You have excellent taste in literature," he called out. "Ishiguro, Atwood, Marquez." "Books have always been better company than most people," she replied, measuring coffee grounds into the French press. The familiar routine of brewing coffee anchored her in the strangeness of having him, in her space. When she returned with 2 steaming mugs, Thomas was studying a small wooden box on her mantelpiece. "My grandmother's," she explained, setting the coffee down. "She collected interesting pebbles from every place she visited. Said they were more honest souvenirs than postcards." Thomas smiled. "She sounds wise." She was. Olivia sat on the sofa, tucking her feet beneath her. "She always told me that life happens in the spaces between plans. I never quite understood what she meant until last night," Thomas finished, taking a seat beside her. "Yes." They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence, the early morning light streaming through Olivia's curtains, casting golden patterns on the hardwood floor. Outside, the city continued its bustle, but within these walls, time seemed to move at its own gentle pace. "I have something for you," Thomas said suddenly, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small, smooth stone, deep blue with veins of white quartz running through it. "I found this on the Brighton shore, the day after I met you on the train. I've carried it ever since, as a reminder." He placed it in her palm, the stone still warm from being kept close to his heart. "Your grandmother was right about pebbles, being honest souvenirs. This one has been my talisman, my connection to that moment that changed everything." Olivia closed her fingers around the stone, feeling its weight and texture. "You're giving it to me?" "It was always yours," Thomas said, simply. The gesture, so small yet so laden with meaning, broke something open inside Olivia. Years of careful restraint, of measured expectations, of bracing for disappointment seemed to dissolve around this single act of sincere offering. She placed the stone carefully on the coffee table and turned to face him fully. "What happens now, Thomas? After the magic of coincidence and all-night conversations fades, what are we left with?" "Possibility," he answered without hesitation. "The chance to see if what began with a simple act of kindness can grow into something extraordinary." Olivia studied his face in the morning light. The earnestness in his eyes, the gentle curve of his smile, the silver at his temples catching. The sun. Everything about him was both new and somehow familiar, as if she'd been searching for his features without knowing it. "I'd like that," she said softly. Thomas reached for her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "There's just one thing I need to tell you first." Olivia felt a flicker of apprehension. "What is it?" "I haven't been entirely honest about who I am." His expression remained open but turned serious. "The architectural firm, the connections to your work, all of that is true. But there's more to my story." The air in the room seemed to still as Thomas reached again into his pocket and withdrew a worn leather wallet. From it, he produced a faded photograph and handed it to Olivia. The image showed a much younger Thomas, perhaps 20 years ago, standing beside an elderly woman with Olivia's exact copper-framed glasses and warm smile. "Your grandmother," Thomas said quietly. "Eleanor Parker?" Olivia's breath caught. "How?" "She was my father's hospice nurse," he explained, his voice gentle with reverence. "When I arrived in Brighton that day, distraught and lost, she was the one who comforted me. She told me stories about her brilliant granddaughter who believed in small kindnesses and collected pebbles from riverbanks." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as pieces fell into place. "She died before I could visit her that weekend. I never got to say goodbye." "She spoke of you constantly during my father's final days," Thomas continued. "When I described the woman who gave up her seat on the train, Eleanor knew immediately it was you. She made me promise that someday, when the time was right, I would thank you properly." "The train, the seat." Olivia's voice trembled. "That was all real?" "Every word. But meeting you wasn't chance. It was Eleanor's final gift to us both." Olivia looked down at the blue stone in her hand, then back at the photograph of her grandmother. The woman who had taught her about kindness, about the beauty in small things, about the patterns that connect seemingly random moments. "She always said life happens in the spaces between plans," Olivia whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. Thomas nodded, his own eyes glistening. "And that love finds its way, even when we've stopped looking for it." As morning light filled the apartment, casting everything in a new glow, Olivia felt the weight of solitude lifting from her shoulders. Her birthday had ended, but something far more significant had begun. A connection orchestrated years ago by a wise woman who understood that sometimes the greatest gifts arrive long after the giver is gone. Olivia reached for Thomas's hand, intertwining their fingers with newfound certainty. "I think my grandmother would be quite pleased with herself right now." Thomas smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "I have no doubt." Outside, a new day unfolded across Hartwell. Inside, in the quiet space between what was and what could be, two people bound by invisible threads of fate, kindness, and a grandmother's final wish discovered that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings are found in the stories we never knew we were part of all along.